On March the 25th, at a meeting of top international athletics officials in South Africa, Diane Modahl was cleared of the allegation that she had taken a performance-enhancing drug.
My initial feeling was one of relief. Total and utter relief that at long last, after nearly 2 years of fighting, the nightmare was over. And then, within a few seconds of that, I felt really quite deflated and very angry that it had happened in the first place.
Two years ago, Diane Modahl was one of the world's top female athletes. She was the Commonwealth Games gold medalist and record holder. She had also run in World Championship and Olympic finals. As the 1994 Commonwealth Games opened in Victoria, Canada, she seemed poised for a successful defence of her title. Then, only hours before her first race, the results of tests taken 2 months earlier in Lisbon came through. Diane, it was alleged, had taken the male hormone testosterone. She was immediately sent home by the British Athletics Federation.
To accuse an athlete of a doping offence is a very, very serious matter. And we take that very seriously indeed. We do not accuse an athlete of such a misdemeanor lightly.
I had only one thing in my mind. No people in the world was going to accuse my wife of using drugs. She had never seen any drugs, and I had never seen any drugs in our entire lives.
How could this happen? Could it be because I've become so introverted towards athletics that maybe God is punishing me in a way simply because I've forgotten my faith and I've become so selfish in my ambition to become one of the best athletes in the world, that this is almost a reminder or some kind of message. I was desperate for answers.
As an athletics manager and agent, Vicente knew it would be difficult to challenge the British Athletics Federation. No athlete had ever disproved such serious allegations from the BAF.
I started to write on everything that they did to try to find angles to attack. I would draw a circle, I would make a line out from the circle, I would say testosterone.
The drug at the centre of the Modahl case immediately raised doubts in the minds of some scientists. Would an 800-metre female athlete ever want to take testosterone?
Testosterone is essentially, the way to think about it, is the male hormone. It's secreted, of course, in large quantities by men. And actually, it's an anabolic hormone, which makes for muscle strength and builds muscles. It's really for those sports where you need some explosive energy, somebody throwing a discus or putting the shot, or perhaps doing the 100 meters. I think for people with more sustained sports, like 800 meters, like the mile, I can't see any value in it at all.
The International Amateur Athletics Federation is the BAF's parent body. It was adamant that Diane could have gained unfair advantage by taking testosterone.
We have found anabolic agents, anabolic steroids, anabolic substances in practically all of our different events in track and field, including the 800 and 1500 meter runners. Two very important effects of the testosterone and anabolic steroids is an increased aggressiveness and an increased body strength.
Diane's only hope was that there might have been an error in the test. The findings, like any positive result, had to be confirmed in a second analysis. A reserve portion of Diane's urine had been retained in Lisbon for the B test.
The authorities' attitude was B tests always confirm A test results, and that it was really a fait accompli. But it was very important to have some people representing Diane's interests present at the B test in Lisbon so that they could see that matters were attended to properly and the procedures that should be followed were in fact followed.
On the 29th of August, Vicente left for Lisbon to attend the B test.
I felt scared. I know nothing about laboratories. I decided to keep my eyes open, my ears open, and try to collect as much information as I could.
There was every reason to expect a highly professional test. Diane's fate lay in the hands of the top laboratory of one of Europe's top athletics nations. Representatives of the British Athletics Federation would be attending the test, but Vicente had taken his own scientific advisor.
We all thought, well, let's get out there. As soon as we get the results of this B test, the whole business is going to be over because there has been some ghastly mistake. So there was a certain feeling of excitement almost that, you know, this was going to be the end of Diane's misery.
When they arrived, Vicente was introduced to one of the Portuguese officials.
His eyes were just going left and right, and he wasn't able to focus and be calm and look forward. He was very sort of nervous about the whole situation.
The first thing we did was ask for the chain of custody documents to be produced.
Chain of custody documents should log the movements and changes in storage conditions of a urine sample. They should also make it clear who had been responsible for the sample at any given moment. Any athlete facing a B test would have had the right to expect this paperwork.
There was much conversation in Portuguese and really nothing else other than conversation because the papers just could not be produced.
They didn't have them. They said, "Oh, we don't have them here. We're going to locate them, but we haven't got them at the moment."
Chain of custody documents are a requirement for any test, but with so many observers assembled at the Lisbon laboratory, the Portuguese were anxious to get going.
The Portuguese officials promised that in tandem with the tests being done, they would produce the necessary documents which would verify the chain of custody. We took these comments at face value and trusted the Portuguese.
The seal was broken and the test started.
When it was opened, it was clear to the people in that room that there was a very foul and obvious smell coming from the urine sample.
The British Athletics Federation observer, Dr. David Cowan, knew the smell of ammonia was very significant.
Dr. Cowan said, "It smells like it's contaminated. Have you done a pH on the urine?" "No."
pH is a measure of acidity and alkalinity. If Diane's urine had gone off, scientists would expect to find a rise in alkalinity.
It's measured on a logarithmic scale. In other words, a change from 5 to 6 is not a change of 1, it's a change of 10 times the degree of alkalinity within the sample.
He came out and said, "This is incredible. The sample has a pH value of 9, and it had the pH value when Diane gave it of 5.
To change from a pH of 5 to a pH of almost 9 implies that there was huge changes within that sample during the period of storage, and all reasonable laboratories would not analyse a specimen under these circumstances.
The Portuguese weren't convinced that this deterioration would have affected the levels of testosterone.
A deviating pH is not in any way making an analytical result impossible or invalid.
I was shocked. I mean, we had the opinion of David Cowan, who said that if that had happened in his own laboratory, he would have discarded the sample quite properly. That really the findings would be so unreliable that you wouldn't know what to make of them.
Anyone representing any party there could have said, no, I don't want to have this analyzed unless I have this or that requirement fulfilled, if they feel that is necessary or important, yeah?
With respect to Professor Lundquist, he knows, and I know that that just simply is not the way things are done.
If you feel that you wouldn't like to have it analyzed, then you say stop. No one did in this particular case, so far as I know.
Throughout the day, I tried to stop the test. I said, are you really going to continue this test? Oh yes, we have to. I felt angry. Very, very angry. Because I realized that whatever we came up with, they were going to proceed.
Still at that stage, I was not prepared for the result that came through.
In the end of the day, when we sat around and they completed the test, they said to me that it had proven the A test.
Vicente just couldn't believe it. Neither could I, but of course it had a much more personal effect on Vicente than it would on me. And he was just totally destroyed, really. He broke down at the time, and it was difficult to console him.
I was then very, very worried. We then asked for the contemporaneous chain of custody.
You have to have the documents. You have to know what sample you are analyzing, and you have to record it.
What they came with was a backdated document written during the day, signed 30th of August 1994, the events that had happened to Diane's urine sample. In other words, it didn't exist a contemporaneous chain of custody.
Well, I cannot comment on this, honestly, because I want to look at those arguments and see what is behind it.
When the result of the B test was announced, Diane was suspended from athletics pending a disciplinary hearing. There was no explanation for the absence of proper chain of custody documents, and no explanation for the deterioration of the urine sample.
I felt that they had made a conviction. That conviction had to stand. They had to maintain her guilt to prevent the dope testing system or the Lisbon laboratory to actually look like it has flaws in it. From that moment, I think that a conspiracy started to keep Diane out of the sport for the best for the system, so the system and the Lisbon laboratory could survive.
The International Amateur Athletics Federation presides over a multi-million-pound doping control programme. Lisbon, like all the IAAF laboratories, had to be seen to be getting it right.
I, in my position as sports organizer, will have to trust the laboratory report that comes out of this type of recognized international expertise.
They must feel that no mistakes can be made, that there isn't a potential there for mistakes to be made. And at that stage, there was nobody within the IAAF who even accepted that there was a possibility of a mistake having been made. And therefore they felt that they needed to proceed with prosecution of Diane.
Diane would now have to defend herself at a British Athletics Federation hearing to be held in December. This would give her the chance to clear her name, but the positive result from the B test weighed heavily against her.
Vicente actually kept my morale up. He was very, very strong and very determined that we would win this and we would get to the bottom of this. I, on the other hand, was still in a terrible state of distress.
I encourage Diane to train because it's a very vital part of Diane's life. She's done it since she was 11 and she enjoys it very much. To run for Diane is like play violin for a violinist. It is something you do because the emotions follow the running. It's not, you don't go out running, but to run itself makes this chemistry work inside you, that it's something special you're doing.
It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy because, of course, I couldn't see a future that I would run again.
Diane's future would depend on scientific evidence presented to the BAF hearing. Dr. John Honour was commissioned by the Modahls to examine the Lisbon data.
I really believe in the power of the technology that's involved, and if used properly, I believe it's a very powerful technique. But I really wasn't comfortable about the way that it had been used in the case of Mrs. Modahl. And there were a number of reservations that this was really sufficient evidence to destroy someone's career.
The first mystery seemed to defy scientific logic. Faced with a high reading of testosterone in an athlete, scientists would expect to find increased levels of substances known as the testosterone metabolites. These metabolites would be produced by the liver almost immediately after taking the drug.
Now, the bizarre finding in Diane's urine was there was said to be a great excess of testosterone, but no excess of these metabolites. I mean, completely incompatible with the metabolism of injected testosterone. No metabolites. I mean, it's nothing there to suggest that that compound had been through her body.
The Modahl scientists were sceptical about the Lisbon findings, but if Diane was innocent, where could the testosterone in the sample have come from?
I was looking for an explanation of the findings, for an alternative to testosterone administration. Had the sample been adulterated? Could there have been some change within the sample which we knew was degraded?
By December, the scientists knew that both the A and B samples had probably been left unrefrigerated in the hot Lisbon climate for nearly 2 days. This would have allowed bacteria to grow and cause a dramatic rise in pH, but it would still not have been enough to explain the testosterone level. Then, a week before the hearing, the mystery began to unravel.
I was actually on a train, and I had a notepad in front of me and a pen, and I just began to think through chemical reactions that we do during the analysis. It suddenly hit me that with only 1 or 2 chemical steps, I could actually get bacteria which I knew to be present in the sample to convert natural steroids in the urine into testosterone.
This meant the testosterone in Diane's urine might be explained by a natural chemical reaction. In the Lisbon heat, the bacteria in Diane's urine sample could have turned perfectly innocent compounds into testosterone.
This was a real breakthrough. I then realised that this might well be the explanation of the odd results which I'd been looking at from Lisbon now for several weeks.
John was over the moon because it's like solving, I suppose, like solving a crossword puzzle or getting the final clue into a jigsaw puzzle. He got it right.
With Dr. Honor's new theory to explain the testosterone levels, the Modahl team approached the hearing in confident mood.
We had searched for the best medical experts in particular fields in the country, and we had found them. And so I was very confident that with their eminence, their experience and background, that we couldn't lose.
What I had expected was that there would be a group of individuals who would be sitting around a table and would be trying to get to the truth of the matter. What actually happened was that instead of trying to get to the truth, it was a contest. It became us against them, really. And at some stages, it looked as if it was who was going to be the winning team rather than what was the best way of dealing with Diane's problem.
This was, after all, a prosecution of Diane by the BAF, and the prosecution was going to be heard by the BAF panel. So they were both prosecutor and judge in this case. And it was certainly, the onus was on them, that they had to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that a doping offence had taken place.
I've never felt so uncomfortable and humiliated. The prosecution put such a case that I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The picture that was painted was so scary, it was so frightening.
The prosecution set about trying to discredit every member of the people who were appearing on Diane's behalf.
The only thing you have to concern yourselves with, he said to the panel, is that this girl has tested positive for testosterone. Okay, they may mention chain of custody, they may mention metabolites, they may mention that the laboratory didn't follow the procedures, but don't worry about that. The test was positive. And I remember saying to myself, come on, Diane, concentrate, concentrate. You must concentrate. Because it was so easy just to turn off, just to close my eyes and just to be somewhere else except in that room.
The panel was not concerned by the possible failings of the Lisbon laboratory. It was soon clear that Diane's only hope lay with Dr. Honor's hypothesis.
Looking at the faces of the panel as I was trying to explain this science on a chart, one wasn't too sure that one was getting the message right through to them. But it's complicated science. Sometimes my clinical colleagues have difficulty in understanding the science behind such hypotheses.
There are the niceties of an English tribunal, the courtesies, the, with the greatest respect type remarks. There were some fairly trivial complaints made about him. I mean, some that you would hardly believe. For example, he was asked how many papers had he written, how many scientific papers. He'd written 95 papers, apparently. How many of them had been on bacterial metabolism of steroids? 5, he says. Oh, I mean, hardly 5% of your work was the council said. Only 5% of your work devoted to this subject. I had to point out to our barrister that was 5 more papers than anybody else in the room had ever written.
When he presented his evidence, he presented it in his very modest way. If he has a fault, it's that he's too modest, and he's the last person to blow his own trumpet. Unfortunately, that was to his disadvantage because his evidence was almost completely dismissed.
I've not actually heard of Dr. Honor until that particular day. I respect what he says and I respect his credentials, but he was one, as it were, against 3 others.
The BAF scientists regarded urine as a hostile chemical environment in which Dr. Honor's theoretical process of bacterial transformation was unlikely to occur. But Dr. Honor wasn't required to prove that it had happened, only that it could.
I really felt that we created reasonable doubt into the issue of testosterone administration.
He put across a good case, we listened to it, but we've accepted on the whole that it was a hypothesis which had never been proven.
Everybody in the room agreed on that there was severe bacterial contamination of the urine sample. Everybody in the room agreed that bacteria under certain circumstances could produce this increase in testosterone, but the sticking point was the probability that this was the explanation.
We accept that it could have happened, but we felt that the probability was so slight that we discounted it beyond all reasonable doubt.
There was reasonable doubt with regard to the chain of custody. There was reasonable doubt with regard to the storage of the sample. There was reasonable doubt with regard to the change in the pH. There was, to me, extreme doubt about the levels of metabolites that were present within the urine. And then when we heard John Honor's explanation, that seemed to me to clinch the whole matter. And I walked out of the hearing fully, delighted, feeling like celebrating, thinking that, the whole business is going to be over at long last.
14th of December 1994. Waiting, waiting, waiting. Vicente and I are wrapped in our own thoughts, thinking, writing, waiting, worrying. So nervous, it's terrible. I've never experienced such a traumatic time in my life. I feel literally sick to my stomach.
The panel deliberated for almost 2 hours this morning. Its verdict came at lunchtime.
Having heard all the evidence and considered all the documents, the committee was satisfied unanimously, beyond reasonable doubt, that a doping offence had been committed by Mrs. Modahl. Accordingly, she is ineligible to compete in the UK and abroad for 4 years from the 18th of June 1994.
I just couldn't believe it. I had sat through all the evidence. I think I had understood it all. And I had come up with a completely different conclusion. And I just couldn't see how a panel could have come to that decision, basically. I just could not understand it. And then when it was said that the verdict was unanimous, I found that even harder to believe.
I am horrified at the decision and at the prospect of the nightmare of the last 4 months continuing. I cannot accept BAF's decision and will carry on fighting to clear my name because I know that I am innocent. I have never taken any banned substance. I shall challenge the committee's decision and take my case to the independent appeal panel.
No one from Portugal did come over to give...
I had been betrayed. I had been betrayed, I felt, by the very people I had put all my trust into. I've represented the British Athletics Federation for some 13 years and I felt that they would support me when I needed them most. and they didn't. I needed to fight on. I was very inclined to fight on after that, because I knew that the decision they had come to was so, so wrong.
It's good, Diane. It's good. Okay, Diane. What I'd like you to do now, it was the same timing at 8.9, 1/10 slower. What I'd like you to do on the last 4 is that we stop the timing and you do that.
As they planned for the appeal, the Modahls were still pinning their hopes on the ideas of Dr. Honor.
Quite easy. Then just try to change.
I still was confident in my hypothesis, and so I really felt that if we were going to an appeal, that I would have to have some moral support from people who have more experience than me.
When I looked at the proceedings of the original hearing, I was a little surprised at how readily Dr. Honor's hypothesis had been dismissed. It seemed that the only way to pursue this particular hypothesis was, of course, to test it.
Professor Gaskell's lab took urine samples from 2 female athletes. By storing them at a high temperature, they managed to make them degrade in a similar way to Diane's urine. They then monitored the samples for signs of increased levels of testosterone. This all went on, unbeknown to the Modahls.
The outcome of the experiments was really quite unpredictable, and it would have been, I think, unfair to raise false hopes in the Modahls' minds as to the possible outcome of the experiments.
Meanwhile, Dr. Honor dug in for an extensive search of the archives. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Most scientists would discard degraded urine samples straight away. But there was still a chance that someone, somewhere, had once tried to prove his hypothesis.
I was looking through the titles of these papers, and I found the paper which was entitled Bacterial Degradation of Steroids in Urine. I mean, I don't think I could believe that this title was there. It was published in a German journal, and so I remembered writing down the reference for this and rushing to my phone and contacting someone in Germany who I knew could find this reference for me very quickly.
This 20-year-old article provided the evidence that Dr. Honor was looking for. He knew that the authority of such outdated research could be called into question. But 2 weeks before the appeal, this was the closest he had come to new evidence. What Dr. Honor didn't know was that a massive breakthrough was only days away. Professor Gaskell was about to replicate Diane's result in his own experiment.
We had the feeling of excitement that here are some important data, but a feeling of caution also that we had to apply the utmost rigor to the assessment of these data to ensure that our conclusions were indeed valid.
That's fine. Okay. Now let's just see. We didn't really make a concerted effort to start a family, but we knew that we had to carry on with our lives.
Okay, that's perfect.
We had to have a positive outlook if we were ever going to enjoy living a life as a couple again. So it was really a very rich blessing to find out that I was actually pregnant.
There it is, galloping away. Yes. That's lovely, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
That's really good. Okay.
Being pregnant is a wonderful thing that can happen to any woman, really. But I no longer felt confident about the person I was. I didn't know my future. My future was in the hands of strangers. And it was very hard to appreciate exactly what was happening. I didn't like who I was. I no longer had the enjoyment out of life which I once had.
A week before the appeal, the Modahls thought that Dr. Honor's library paper was the most important new evidence they had. Then, Professor Gaskell broke his silence.
I was called up by Tony, which told he had just spoken to Simon Gaskell, just known about it, and he said they managed it.
He came upstairs shortly after the telephone call and he said, "They've been able to prove it." And I looked at him quite nonchalant and quite uninterested and said, "They've been able to prove what?" And he said, "They've been able to find that bacteria actually converts to testosterone." And still, I didn't really become excited about it because I'd lost hope in the case. It didn't mean anything to me. We'd had small breakthroughs before in the case, and they didn't make any difference. We had still lost.
Professor Gaskell was determined that this would be no false dawn. He had established that John Honor's idea of bacterial transformation was not only theoretically possible, but it could be replicated in laboratory experiments.
By establishing the possibility, of course, we established the possibility that this transformation could indeed have taken place in the Diane Modahl sample, following the storage that was applied in Lisbon.
Now we have to win. We guaranteed have to win, because this is conclusive evidence. This is what they've asked about all the time. Prove it, and we believe you. And Diane didn't want to believe it.
We should have done it the first time with the evidence that we had. There was more than enough doubt to show what had happened. So if we weren't able to do it then, I was certain that we weren't able to do it this time. I knew what we were dealing with this time. And I was prepared for that. And I was almost protecting my emotions by not allowing myself to believe that we would win.
The appeal opened on the 24th of July 1995. The British Athletics Federation objected to the late submission of Professor Gaskell's evidence, but this was overruled by the QC conducting the appeal. The findings were submitted, and the Modahls were asked to wait for the verdict.
Diane felt very weak. She felt like giving up completely. She simply didn't believe it. She was so depressed that day. I had to force her out.
We actually ended up at the British Museum.
We walked around there very, very nervous to walk in at all because we were afraid my mobile phone wouldn't work inside. But I looked at it all the time that it actually had a connection and so on.
It was good just to be out in a way. Our minds were on something else and we were walking around, taking our time and hoping for the phone to ring.
Suddenly the phone rang and it was 5:15 and I opened the flap of my mobile phone and took it to my ear, and I just heard Tony say, "We won." And that is the most incredible moment I've ever had. That's when we realized that our lives might at one stage be normal again. And I just screamed in Norwegian, "Ja!" and I threw my fist up in the air, and And Diane, she just was stunned.
I heard Vicente just yell out really loud and punch his arm in the air. And he actually spoke Norwegian when he heard the decision. And he said, "We've won. We've won." And we just cried. We just cried. We couldn't believe it. We just cried. I didn't believe for a second we would win.
I think it was the best and the worst moment in my life, because I realized in one way it was Diane was innocent. At the same time as it proved that the world of athletics had betrayed one of its own athletes.
In March, the IAAF suspended all contracts with the Lisbon laboratory and confirmed Diane's right to participate in competitive athletics.
My confidence has been severely knocked, and I think it's going to take me quite a while to regain that inner strength that I once had. But I am looking at this positively now. I have decided that I do want to return to the track, and I'm returning to be much better than I was before. Not the same, but with a much stronger attitude.
Diane has been training at a high-altitude camp in New Mexico in preparation for this year's Olympic Games. But life is not yet back to normal for the Modahls.
Financially, it has literally left us on the verge of bankruptcy. We have had to put our house on sale, and Diane has had zero income since 24th of August 1994. I have lost substantial income from my athletics company simply because of the association with the case.
Diane is currently suing the British Athletics Federation for compensation.
There should be more support and protection for innocent athletes, because after all, the dope testing system was set up to protect innocent athletes, and in this case it hasn't done that. We have been two totally powerless individuals fighting against athletic authorities and federations without finance, without emotional backup, and without any support. Look at those legs.
Så lang bein. Det är dejligt.
How dare you? So I said, "No, I don't believe you. Here's Vicente now." But you hadn't arrived then. I said, "Here's Vicente now with her."
Ja.
Oh, look at that.
Det var
Better
problemet.
than pizza, isn't it?
Ja, det var dejligt. Litt melk å drikke. Ja.
Oh, we missed you today. We did. We've been to the beach. Been to the beach.
Ingen forstår hva vi sier, Imani. Bare du og jeg. Nobody understands what we are talking about because we speak Norwegian.
Only Papa.